Welcome to Blindspot, an audio podcast series about forensic science and the role forensic experts play in our judicial system. The name Blindspot comes from the fact that forensic experts can see and hear what laypersons cannot. Forensic experts reveal the blind spot in court using their experience and expertise as forensic scientists.
I'm proud to have with us today Dorothy Stout on this episode of Blindspot. Dorothy has been involved in forensic video analysis since 1998. She's worked for the U.S. Postal Inspection Service and performed forensic video analysis for the U.S. Department of Defense Computer Forensic Laboratory. She's worked with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Security Industry Association, and she's been qualified as an expert and testified in all levels of courts in the United States, and continues to offer expert testimony in civil and criminal cases. Dorothy has taught as an adjunct professor at George Washington University and the University of Indianapolis, and the British Columbia Institute of Technology. Dorothy Stout holds a master's degree in forensic science and a bachelor degree in psychology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dorothy. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you, Dorothy, is to tell me what you're seeing on the horizon when it comes to video forensics. You're out there in the field training probably quite a bit throughout the course of the year, but how many times do you go out and conduct classes on an annual basis?
At this time, I do a lot of training. I am out conducting classes at least once a month, if not twice every month.
So you're probably seeing the increase in video forensic training as opposed to a decrease.
That is correct. There are definitely more people in law enforcement who have a need to understand not only how to retrieve the video that's being recorded every day in all sorts of forms, but also who have a need to be able to play that video, extract segments from the video, and of course do clarification so they can see what's going on in the video.
And that's something that I see on a weekly basis is the tiny little video that shows up, the resolution's low, the frame rate is low, but yet why can't we recover the video so that they could see who's driving the car, or can't we make their face out better? And it's interesting, during class you had mentioned when somebody calls and asks for a license plate recovery, you most always just say it's not possible because you know what it's like to try to recover something so tiny in a little video like that.
Yes, it's very interesting. You know, everybody has an idea of how wonderful video evidence can be, but those individuals who are installing video security systems have no idea how low the quality is of the systems that they're installing. And it's unfortunate because there are cameras everywhere. They're collecting information, but they're not collecting necessarily readily useful information. The resolution is very low, but the future is bright. There are new cameras that are coming out with resolutions that are phenomenal. And so hopefully one of these days when somebody asks me, can you enhance this so we can see the license plate, my answer will be definitely. Send it to me and I have all the tools that can make that happen.
So of all of the video that you recover, do you ever run into situations where you find that the settings were either default or set to a lower quality standard than what that system is capable of recording?
Definitely. A lot of the systems, they have the capability of doing so many different things, not only from a higher resolution, higher frame rate perspective, but in terms of smart recording technologies that allow them to record at a higher resolution and a higher quality those moments that are going to be key to them and investigations, but also to minimize the amount of storage that's being used on their hard drive space. I rarely see those settings actually used and incorporated on a digital video recorder. And if they were set to a higher resolution or for smart recording technology, oftentimes they're not maintained. So a camera could have moved or maybe the camera is not functioning anymore, and nobody's checking to see if the digital video recorder they set up for video surveillance is functioning on a regular basis, if the settings are still applicable. So it's unfortunate. We have the ability to use great technology. Most people buy a system, take it out of the box, connect it to the cameras, and say, hey, I guess it's running, and that's all I need to do.
Until something happens, and then that's when an expert comes in and says, hey, you could have set these quality standards higher and gotten much better resolution, or did you know your system's capable of this?
Exactly. And it's unfortunate that at the time that something happens, the time you want your system to work the most, that's the time you find out it's not working to the best of its ability.
Yep. So you train both law enforcement as well as private practice individuals on video forensics. Is that true?
Yes, that is correct.
And what's happening right now within the law enforcement industry, why there's all of a sudden such a big demand for video forensics?
I think there's been a couple of key triggers, crime-wise, that have alerted law enforcement to the value of video evidence. And, of course, the biggest one is the Boston Marathon bombings. In that particular case, at the first instant when the bombings occurred, we didn't have any idea who did what to whom. And the video surveillance, not only from the CCTV systems, in which we got to see the video on the news of the two suspects right away, but all the video evidence that was out there, from cell phones to video cameras to the news media that were in the area at the time that the bomb went off, the first bomb went off, were so critical in helping us not only identify who it was and then locate them right away. I think without that video evidence, it would have been quite a longer investigation. And from that, law enforcement, I think, has recognized the value of video evidence. I think they always recognize the value of video evidence, but not necessarily how important it can be to an investigation within the first 24 hours. We also saw a case just recently up in Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia Police Department was fantastic in their ability to retrieve video and get it out for the public to review right away. And that was the woman who was abducted from the streets in Philadelphia, and then, of course, she went missing. They were able to get a video camera in that area, get that video information out to YouTube, which went to the news media outlets, which, of course, went viral after that. And from that video, they were able to actually locate her in the state of Maryland before the worst could have actually occurred.
Yeah, that was great.
I think these are great examples of how video is key to an investigation, not only for a prosecution. And from that, law enforcement recognizes they need to get that video earlier rather than later.
And it's become kind of a standard in the industry with law enforcement to recognize when something like this happens, to go looking at local businesses and different areas where there could be surveillance video that might have information to help them solve the crime.
Exactly. Instead of going to the convenience store that was robbed and saying, do you have any video, they're stepping outside the convenience store and they're looking at the stores next door, the stores across the street, and collecting that video evidence as well, and that's fantastic.
Can you share with me how you evolved into a video forensic expert?
Sure. It's a very, it's an interesting story. I got my master's degree in forensic science from George Washington University, so I wanted to be involved in law enforcement and the analysis of evidence, but I didn't quite know about analyzing video evidence. I was hired by the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. That was my first career, working with them in their physical evidence laboratory. And I was actually a firearms and tool mark examiner, as well as crime scene processing. And I became quite involved with digital photography and using a camera through the microscope to take pictures of my comparison analysis for tool marks and firearms analysis. And because I was the one who was very interested in computers and photography, they thought it would be really cool for me to become their forensic video analyst, and I really had no interest in that at all. I was having a great time where I was in the physical evidence laboratory, but I gave it a try, and it turned out to be probably the best career move of my life. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the technology. I enjoy the changes, and I enjoy the advancements that we're going through at this point in time.
Oh my gosh, and there's so many different advancements. What do you see as one of the biggest challenges facing video forensic experts today?
I think one of the biggest challenges for the forensic video analyst is the volume of video, the amount of video that's being requested to be collected as well as analyzed. It used to be with an analog videotape, a lot of those were recorded in the 24-hour record mode. So you'd have one videotape that was 24 hours. But what we're seeing now is if you have a significant event, a crime against a person, homicide, they're asking people to collect 4 days of video, a week's worth of video. And that's a lot of data to actually download and collect. But then it's a lot of data to sift through, to look for information, and to provide enhancements from. And so because it's now data, and because the container that stores that data, the hard drive, for the most part, can store months of video information, when people are now requesting to retrieve all the video, it's no longer just 24 hours. It's a lot of video information. And to go through that, to analyze it, to locate, to clarify, and then ultimately play it back for investigative or court purposes, it's a very large task. And there's very few, I think, requesters who understand how much data we're talking about and how long it takes to do that type of a process.
I totally can relate to that on a lot of different levels. And what about the importance of organizing all of this activity and coming up with a workflow for each organization? Do you have any suggestions on how that could be accomplished?
Definitely. I think for each organization, when it comes to working with video, the first thing they need to recognize is that video is evidence. It is something that needs to be collected, that needs to have a chain of custody procedures, and needs to be submitted as evidence. And at this time, some agencies are not necessarily following that type of procedure or have standard operating procedures for handling video evidence. Because video is becoming so much more valuable as evidence. It's used so much more for prosecution. I do believe that one of the things that most opposing counsels will want to try to do is, of course, discredit and remove video evidence from the whole process. So having standard operating procedures so you can say our process was followed and that we submitted it as evidence and it can be authenticated and its integrity is intact. That's very important. They can go right now and look at some of the guidelines and documents that are available through the Scientific Working Group of Imaging Technologies. They offer a document on retrieving video evidence and guidelines for doing that, as well as for analyzing video evidence. But they have to start somewhere, and they need to, of course, come up with a procedure and a policy for collecting video evidence.
Something that's solid and works and can keep up with the demand. I remember in class a few weeks ago out in Portland, I was talking to an officer who mentioned that when they've got good video quality and they present it to the defense attorney, it all comes down to the plea and the case is done. So video is actually keeping a lot of these cases out of the courtroom, don't you think?
Yes, I agree with that. I think you'll find that many people who have been in the forensic video community for a long time, they might not testify on a regular basis as compared to some of the other traditional forensic sciences who do have to testify more often. And that's because our information, our analysis and our enhancements and our presentation of materials is so compelling that most times people would rather settle or go for a plea than to take their chances in court and get, a harsher sentence than if they get a plea deal.
Yeah. Yep, I agree with that. How in the heck do you keep up with all of this?
I have no idea.
You don't sleep, right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's there's so much going on in the video community right now, and I think I'm fortunate in that because I do provide training and I do get to travel a lot and I meet so many people I get to hear their stories, their cases, the things that are challenging them. And it's very fascinating to me to have those discussions because it really helps me get a feel for what people are seeing on a regular basis. If I had to stay in my office, in my laboratory, and not go out, I'd only see what comes through the door. But I get the opportunity to travel the entire country and see what's going on with all these different people and all these different practitioners. So it's fantastic. And from that, of course, I spent a lot of time online and researching and reading, and I find it very interesting, the developments that we're seeing in our technology.
And I got my start in the audio industry and audio forensics and brought video on when it started to become a media that was actually being used in courts. And my actual training goes back to video back when I was in high school. So it's been an interesting journey, and it was only a few years ago that I actually reached out and started to take training programs. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but for the longest time, I was just focused on doing the work and researching and doing the work and researching, but getting on the American Board of Recorded Evidence and networking with my peers and coming to training classes such as yours in the International Association of Identification, I realized that I know a little bit more than I thought I knew. And I also love to hear other people's stories, like what you just said, because I think it's so important for us all to share our information and our feedback for each other so that we can learn and grow from each other.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much to be said for even just attending a presentation. We used to call it I Had a Case, because when you watch somebody receive different types of video evidence and how they handled it and how they processed it and what the end result was, what a valuable experience. You're learning from somebody else's trials and tribulations, and it's just fantastic.
I agree. Hey, thank you, Dorothy, very, very much for doing this interview with us. I know your information and your knowledge is going to help a lot of people, and I think people deciding whether or not to get into a career of video forensics might just reconsider or think again.
Yes, definitely. I think it's so much more interesting than some of the other forensic sciences that are out there. I mean, it's new and different every single day.
Hey, if anybody wanted to contact you or wanted more information about the training programs that you offer, how would they go about finding you?
They can find us online at resvid.com, or they can send us an email at info@resvid.com. That's the best way to get in contact us. But phone is always open, which is 703-759-7803.
Excellent. Thank you, Dorothy. I look forward to seeing you down the road in one of your training programs, because I'm going to continue to keep up with you and look forward to sharing information with you.
Awesome, Ed. I appreciate this, too. I think it's going to be great.
This concludes this episode of Blindspot. If you subscribe to this podcast, you'll be notified of future episodes as they're produced. We welcome your comments and questions at primeauforensics@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This episode, we have a guest with us, Alan Combs, who I share a position on the American Board of Recorded Evidence with. I've met Alan years ago. He's an outstanding audio and video forensic expert with over a decade of